this meeting. We have the downtown standards and guidelines rewrite, condensing. I think it's down to, what, from 300 pages or something crazy to 77 pages already. This technical advisory committee, John, you were a member of that, and apparently I'm also now part of it.
Oh, you got roped into it?
Yeah, I got roped into it.
Good for you.
We got our usual hearings throughout the year, and the typical, what we're doing these days are zoning code tweaks. Reminds me of, I've carried this line for quite a few days, just saw the Betty Davis movie, All About Eves, where she's going up the stairs and she says, fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a busy year. I paraphrase her. So, any rate, a little bit of history of Mineral Station. It's in the information that we got, but I want to go over a couple of things. One is we got that grant to study the Mineral Station. There's also the downtown station, Puma, we hired in, I think, 2006 to do the economic study for the Mineral Station. And they also did a lot of the community outreach and informational sessions. Citizen input, we had two Carson Nature Center meetings. It was just a very informal walk around at various stations and talk about transportation, the kinds of buildings, et cetera, et cetera. I think there were like five or six different stations. Karina and I were heavily involved with that. We also had a citizens meeting in council chambers where we had those little clickers and we were voting on various schemes, and that was quite interesting. So one of the reasons for I'm happy about getting this started again is that very valuable community information and input about the Mineral Station that we've got. I don't want to see that gathering dust and lost forever. The project was put on hold last year, I think basically because of the unknowns. Unknown as to what's going on with the Santa Fe study of traffic. We'll be talking about this PEL study. Didn't know too much about when RTD wants to expand their station into Highlands Ranch. Parking needs, do we need more, do we need less, what's going on there? A lot of citizens were complaining about the unknown. So basically the study got shelved until tonight. And council last month voted to get back into the study, but not as a heavy-duty master plan, but a full-blown master plan, but what they ended up calling a framework plan, or what Bruce and I were coming up with alternate names: a vision plan, action plan, prologue plan. But something that less than a complete study, but enough to give information to CDOT and to the city for this Pell study that's coming up. What's the purpose of this framework plan? For me, it's our framework plan will help to guide what Littleton wants out of the CDOT Pell study for the Mineral Santa Fe corridor. After that, sometime down the road, Pell study gets started, gets completed. I don't think it's actually started yet. Is that correct?
It's in the process to getting...
Process. Okay, process of beginning. Okay. Eventually it's going to be completed. Then, in my mind, Littleton, hopefully we can complete the master plan, the full-blown master plan for the Mineral Station. That's what I'm after. After that, I see Littleton updating the Santa Fe corridor study. Which to me, the most three important things that the Planning Commission would be involved with in the next 3 years are Santa Fe corridor study, Santa Fe corridor study, and Santa Fe corridor study. Everything else is 3, 4, 5, and 6. To me, that's the most important, the most dangerous, and the area of most opportunity for Littleton. So, with that intro, we'll turn it over to Jocelyn to start with our framework plan analysis.
Sure. Well, thanks, Mark. Yes, so the purpose of the meeting this evening is you have the draft plan, and it's really to have discussion about it, your feedback, your input, your questions, and start working on a draft plan. Next steps would be, we have a study session, joint study session with City Council on January 23rd. So that's the goal. We'll see how we get this evening, and go from there. Then, assuming everything goes well, we do the joint study session with City Council, and we have a public meeting on the plan, get input all along the way. We're getting input. And then, continuing to move the plan forward for adoption, coming through Planning Commission, and then final review by City Council. So that's kind of the steps. And we have, like I said, the tentative date with City Council on the 23rd. We do have a tentative date for the public meeting on February 15th.
February what?
February 15th. And as Mark said, I do, at the end of this, we can talk about timelines and structure of all of the, I'm calling them long-range planning projects that are on your plate right now. Mineral, Bellevue, and the downtown design guidelines. But I was thinking we could do that part at the end. And really what you all probably want to do is jump into this draft that you had a chance to review. So, Mark, I'm not sure how you wanted to structure it. There are page numbers on the draft. We could just start with
slog through it, page by page.
Page by page, or big comments to start, or however.
Maybe just a general impression. That would be good. Go around the horn and get general impressions about.
And I am me, myself, and I this evening, so I can take notes on generally what you guys say. Well, edits as well. However we want to do it. I would say the one thing is, unless they're major, obvious, glaring like typos and grammatical stuff, that part we can deal with later. It's really more, I want your, content input is probably the most helpful. But certainly if you've taken the time to go through and find those grammatical edits and whatnot, give those to me at the end of this meeting, because I certainly need all of that correction as well.
Is it possible to get a Word type document of this rather than a PDF? Editing
Sure.
purposes? Okay.
Well, I guess we'll just have to manage like how many people are editing it, and then, But we'll just have to work through that.
Okay.
But
Can you send that out then?
6 different people giving me different word edits. I don't know how to. Anyway, we'll
it'll
work on that.
overwhelm you. Okay.
Figure it out.
All right.
Yep.
We won't get into the
Yep.
commas and the punctuation tonight. Okay.
Yep.
Let's go around and just get some general impressions to start here.
So I've been traveling, I haven't had a chance to review, so I apologize.
I'm sorry?
I've been traveling, I haven't had a chance to review it.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
Well, my general impression was the part of it was the information kind of surrounding this as well, is that we don't have a lot of information. We don't, we discussed the December 12th council meeting as well, and that we don't have a lot of information. I mean, I think we do have a lot of information, but that seemed to be, especially where things are headed, the Enser property, the light rail extension was mentioned. I'm not saying that I think there's not enough information. I just felt like that was kind of the theme, was that there wasn't enough information to do a plan. And I guess that was just my impression about it generally. But I think that I'm glad we're going through it, and I'm glad we're moving forward. One thing that it brought to mind, though, too, was that it was kind of discovered that Littleton does have a traffic study. And
Or a traffic master plan?
or master plan,
transportation
something like
master
that.
plan?
Yeah,
Correct.
that's what I was thinking of. Is that something that's being thought of as kind of along the same lines? Because it seems like that would be a great step towards kind of understanding where that. Because I think some of my impression was that that's kind of where maybe council didn't feel like there was enough information, that they didn't know where the traffic was headed really with the
Right, we
extension.
don't have a transportation master plan, that's correct.
And is that something that they're planning?
Public Works definitely has that on their list of things that we need to work on, yes.
But not in conjunction with this or any information going into this regarding that.
Well, I think that's an important piece. I think if my impression would be of the conversation that council had is what they said is we didn't have enough information. Transportation master plan would be also helpful to create a master plan for the Mineral Light Rail Station. So that's why they said don't do a master plan at this time.
Yeah.
And so we pulled back, and this is more of a framework plan. It's not intended to be a master plan.
Right.
So I'm just making sure that's clear.
No, yeah, I understand that. It just was that was just the impression I had, getting into this. But, so I guess that's my general thoughts to start out.
So I think my general thought was highlighted by some of the opening comments where you described sort of how this fits into the overall planning process for the city and for the station area, because the plan as it's written sort of outlines here's the history and background, and then here's some more information, and then we'll get into the plan. But it'd be wonderful to have something right up front that says, here's the thesis statement for the plan. This is what we're accomplishing with this. This is what this document is providing that we don't currently have today. And that'd be great to have as kind of an executive summary or something right up front. That's what I've got.
Okay, yeah, my general impression, there's a lot of information there. It pulls in a lot of related studies. I noticed some of the supporting materials in the appendices. We're discussing some of the master planning alternatives 1 and 2. I don't know if they purposely avoided summarizing those in here for the framework, but it seems like maybe it would add a little bit of context to the framework to discuss some of those alternatives that the public had already commented on. And I couldn't really find what those exactly were, but the comments, said we like alternative 1 better, alternative 2 better.
I mean, mostly we really pulled away from that because that was really when we were talking about a master plan. Those were alternatives for how did we want to see the mineral property itself develop.
So that, I don't know if there's a reason to pull that in, just kind of summarize that briefly, where that got left off might add some context to this plan. Since it is in the supporting document.
It's in the attachments.
The attachments,
right.
yeah.
We could just attach it to the attachments.
Right, yeah, that would take care of it. Then the information would be there for those who wanted to find out where those were based on. And I think there's a little bit of repetitiveness in some of the sections from the action items. So there might be a way, kind of like what we're doing with design standards, to kind of
have an overall.
Pull those out and kind of make it a little bit more concise. So those are my general comments.
Yeah, some of the same expressions you use, almost just every action for every division, are kind of the same language. It could be probably condensed in a beginning sentence or beginning paragraph. Bruce?
I thought for purposes of what we're trying to accomplish that it was actually a pretty good cut at a first draft. I think I sent over an email. I don't know if you saw it or not. Yeah, council was hung up at their meeting on, what do you do at this point? Because really the whole thing hinges on traffic. So, I guess the major issues for me at this juncture are the mineral station itself, we're sort of past peak in terms of the market cycle. So what we're really doing now is looking longer term and trying to put a foundation in place in terms of, structurally in the next 10 years, what do we want to do? And my concern there is that, a lot of the current players, staff, council, citizens, and so forth and so on, 10, 15 years down the road when this thing finally does get redeveloped, it's going to look different. The community is going to look different than it does today. And I think we need to be prudent, from a fiduciary standpoint in terms of what we're doing, but I think we have to good faith engage in terms of putting something together that a broad swath of the population that isn't here yet is going to be interested in working with. The other thing, I think the couple of the things that I put in there, Mark mentioned Enser as being the elephant in the room, which I agree with, but I think Sterling Ranch is an interesting problem, and I don't know how to solve that, because if they actually do end up building 12,000 homes and have 30 to 40,000 people 10 miles away, they're going to dump onto Santa Fe in order to get to Denver. Good luck with that. That's not going to be a pleasant experience for anyone. Which basically means this whole thing, we need a plan for this area, but it almost, by definition, if you're going to try to multimodal solve the traffic attributes, has to have some sort of regional look. This talks about partnering up with Englewood and Sheridan, but I don't know what that all looks like. I think it's an important concept and topic we need to figure out how to bake in here. I don't know what would be expected of us in terms of a regional solution, sort of like what C470 is doing at the moment, or what we would expect from other participants in terms of support. And that sort of goes down the road of the Pell itself. I dug up the handbook, though, the link to the handbook on that thing, because I didn't know anything about it. And I think it'd be really interesting for us to get more up to speed in terms of what's actually in there, what it is they do, how they do it, people who've done them before, what is it we should expect, what should we be thinking about, what are the pitfalls, the landmines, the things we should really take advantage of. I don't know any of that stuff. So that's just some real high-level overview kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, for me, I think it was a decent start. I like the intro, although I like the comment about perhaps defining what is the purpose of this thing up front in another paragraph. That makes sense to me. The introduction, like I said, decent. Background was very good. I think the history was good. Further in, it started to get weak on the goals and action steps that we're taking for what was it? Transportation, recreation, open space, character design, and land use. I know this is not a master plan, but I would like to get a little more concrete in suggestions for what we want to see at that area. A lot of my comments further into this meeting will be addressing that. Let's see, your comment about Sterling Ranch, if they don't build out fully, there'll be 10 or 12 other Sterling Ranches right next door, all the way to Castle Rock. It's a given, it's going to happen. There'll just be a lot more, and what are we going to get? We're going to get a 4-lane highway, 4 lanes in each direction, Santa Fe Drive, slicing through Littleton. Is that what Littleton's going to end up having? Do we want that? Do we have any way of containing it? I don't know. So those are my general comments.
I was actually kind of pleased a few weeks ago when we had that drainage ditch conversation we had a hearing on the drainage ditch, and it went right through the north end of the Enser property there, and it was sort of the first sign of something good and relevant happening that the city had some control over driving. What I think is missing from here, and I know that it's referred to in the market. First of all, I think this is a great start. I really do. And for a person, and Bruce, I can't hold a torch to you, but who has sat through too many mineral station meetings of the exact same conversation, I'm very pleased to see movement towards something finalized and getting it going. At some point, let's just get off the pot, say something, be done with it for now, and move on to the next thing. And so I'm pleased to see that. But what I don't see is truly the market need of it. I'm under the impression there's already a division of Ensor, division of that property, dividing up the parcels going on as we speak. right?
It's happened.
It's happened, it has occurred. That then leads to guys putting drainage ditches and roads and pipes for wires in soon after. Something like that generally follows, right? So I don't know, I want to see what their plans are looking like in ours, because I don't think we really have too much control from here on out of what happens specifically on that Enser property. I think the market really starts to drive that more. I think relevant to the Santa Fe, CDOT and RTD are the dominant players in the mineral station. City of Littleton, I actually think we're not. I think we should roar loud for what we want, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to say, look, there's 5 Sterling ranches coming in south. There's 100,000 people somewhere between here and Castle Rock that we're going to have to get transportation to. All of that is to say, the one piece, and I don't want to get too far off because I don't think I am, is driverless cars. And that has the potential to turn every current road to function like a railroad does, with the technology linking the various vehicles together. What I can't figure out, can't find out, don't know, and relevant to this conversation would be confused by, is what does that mean for Littleton? Would the current 4-lane road that creates Santa Fe be sufficient to handle a highly efficient traffic flow? I don't know. And so I'm very cautious to over-prescript what the needs are there, or over-request what the question is, without understanding what truly is going to happen on the transportation front. I would argue in very short order, certainly within 10 years. So that's where I'm stuck. But I love that the previous work was not lost. I actually read that, and granted, I'm a big picture kind of guy, but this had just enough to remind me of everything that we've been talking about for 3 years and 4 years and since 1864. So that's it.
Personally, I see a lot of things need to be fleshed out more, might need some more research. I agree with Andrew, that's one of my biggest things that I have later in here when we go through this page by page is the autonomous cars. Seen several articles on how that potentially might affect light rail, and some articles that might, how our transportation in Denver is changing, and all that I think will relate back here to mineral. Some of the conversation also about being a little disjointed, that, we have all these separate topics, transportation, recreation, character design, etc., and it's not all addressed as an integrated piece. It's all separated out, and I think that needs to be integrated in a way to show how this all fits together, which I think coincides with what some of the other guys had said. Personally, I have a lot of questions, so I'll ask my questions when we get to the page. Okay.
I'll bring up one additional point that I've left out, and that is Enser, a big elephant in the community. I don't think this framework plan talks about Enser enough. Maybe because nothing's built there yet. It's still unmolested ducks and geese and tall grass. But the report talks about Aspen Grove, but not about the coming attractions, the coming of Enser, which is 1 million square feet, 775 residential units, I guess the upper limit, but that is a considerable amount of space. Make Aspen Grove look like a very small development indeed. So I think our report needs to talk about Enser more.
That's what I meant by the market.
Yeah.
I think that is
the market.
That is the market.
Yeah.
Jackass Hill's not going to
Yeah.
change.
Mineral
Train's not moving.
No. Mineral Station is transportation, maybe a bit of residential, maybe a pad or two of retail, but it's transportation. Enser is the driving force. It's the key to this whole intersection. I've been saying it for years. It is. Everything has to coordinate, and they need to coordinate with what's going on with the station. The station needs to coordinate with what's going to happen at Enser. Just because of the sheer size of it and the sheer square footage that they can build.
I think that's 95% of the conversation.
Yes. Any other general comments? Seeing none. Jocelyn, you want to take us
Sure.
through the page-by-page slog?
So do we just ask our questions as we're going through the pages?
That probably
That is
is the
Or we could,
easiest
rather
way,
than
or
page by page,
however.
we could do, section by section or something.
Yeah.
I'm more of a page-by-page question.
Okay, well then let's do that.
Do you want page by, of course you do.
Any questions on the table of contents? We will eventually put numbers there, right? References, they're just not there yet.
Any more photos involved or?
Oh,
maps or-
absolutely, yeah. Oh, yeah, this is really just the draft to get you guys started looking at it, and we'll add all the things that make it look, about the area as we move forward.
Okay, what type of photos are you looking to put in to add?
Pictures of the area.
Okay.
I think for me, just on the table of contents, again, just something where it shows how this is all integrated. That it's not each just different blocks. Each thing affects the other part of it, and there isn't any place in here that shows everything integrated. It came out in the conversation here about there's a lot of repetition, but there's no integration.
So if you have some suggestions on how we can start looking at that, I'm open to that as well.
Sure. Maybe when we start getting into the different sections.
Sure,
and stuff.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. No, I appreciate the comment.
Several times, and, action plan, you say the same things again and again in each one of the 4 sections. That can be put in the beginning and overall.
Right, and that can show, its integration.
Yeah,
You know,
yes.
how does the transportation relate to what's going on with recreation, land use, all that, and when it's put together, like Mark was saying.
Okay?
I have a very basic question. It's about the title, Framework Plan. So when I look at a framework and I looked at the definition, it talks about a basic conceptual structure, a broad overview that can be changed as required. But it doesn't talk about having action plans in it. It's just a broad overview, as is the step to create up to a plan. But this is a framework plan, so it almost seems like the title.
So, you know what, everything in my mind is open for a conversation. We're not married to anything here. So if you guys at the end of this think maybe it should be action plan, or I think you had a couple other, or Mark, maybe you did step plan or vision plan, I agree. Whatever you think seems to make more sense for the intention behind this, then that's probably what we should focus on as a title.
Council used framework. I think you were taking it from the council meeting, weren't you?
Somewhat, yes.
I think framework says something different than plan, and I personally think that for the information we have and what we're trying to give to people, framework is the right. Plan is not necessary. I don't think we're ready for a plan. Like we talked about, there's too much unknown to actually create a plan, even if it's just an initial basic plan. I think my thought is to keep it as a conceptual plan that can change. And the conversation did come up that we're looking, how many years out are we looking potentially, and things are going to change. That's more of a conceptual plan than trying to have steps to get to some place we're not sure where we're going. In the sense that we don't know what the hell is going to show up. And there's a lot of other things in here that need to be fleshed out about what exactly it means. And to create actions around things that seem so conceptual, to me seems a step too soon. Yeah, just a little premature. Like this would be the step before that.
So I'd open that to the rest of the commission to provide some comments.
Yeah, I like the word framework for what we're trying to accomplish here, and I'd almost like to see either instead of a table of contents or an addition, kind of a visual representation. And this kind of goes back to the integration as well of how things relate to each other. Maybe the center is the mineral station, and then around that, it doesn't have to look like that, but we could have transportation, recreation, character and design kind of around that and how they kind of relate to each other and where to find them within the framework. And then, potentially, if it works out, we could expand that to, to other areas and use the same framework. If we truly had a framework, if you know what I mean.
Of all the titles, it almost got to be comical at at the council meeting, talking about the prologue plan, action plan, vision plan. There were a bunch of others. Bruce and I were sitting side by side, kind of amused by the whole thing. Framework plan sounded pretty reasonable. Framework guide, anything to get away from master plan, I think is
The word plan.
master plan.
It's a framework.
Framework.
Drop the plan and just use framework, like you're saying.
Or just
I like that.
drop plan and just call it framework,
Yeah.
or what?
Call it a framework, yeah.
Framework.
It's basically kind of an outline of what we're going to accomplish in a plan.
Okay.
And, I mean, I guess kind of what I was alluding to is if we could even get more generic, after, I don't want to sidetrack us, but if this is a good framework, we could maybe extend it to other, like, the Littleton Boulevard plan or the Bellevue plan, and have this framework to go off of, and obviously it would need to be changed, the exact, contents, but.
Broadway framework is what you're.
But just like a framework to me seems like, like a scaffolding. It's something that we fill in with, whatever you're trying to accomplish, and we could generalize it to be even more non-specific and use it for, to kind of jumpstart doing some of these other corridors and neighborhoods.
I think the problem with non-specific is be the same thing that's happened with the downtown guidelines and standards. They're so loose that you can drive a truck through them.
Right.
That's my fear. I want to make the.
I don't want to sidetrack us with that right now, but I think if we really do a good job on this, we could then later generalize it and use it for other things. For now, I agree. We should stick with this one. I like the word framework, and I think we should. What we're trying to do is create. I don't even know if outline is the right word, but create an outline for, be able to move forward and create an actual plan down the road.
Probably not a skeletal outline is something that came up when we were
Not
council.
not quite that far back. The skeletal outline, I think, would be good for expanding it later on after we're done with this. Maybe be able to step back, but anyway.
Anybody else? Ambivalence, okay, or framework, good enough?
I think it's semantics, and we're going to be here all night. If
We
we're
will be,
still
yes.
debating the title.
I'm framework. I think it captures what you guys are both saying. Just take plan off, and I think we're in good shape for the
I
time.
think we should wait to see what the document looks like and then call it what it is.
Do that too.
We'll do some more editing, you'll get the photos in.
Change it.
Okay.
Juggernaut. I'd like to change it to Juggernaut.
Bible.
The Bible?
That's the word I was
Did you say juggernaut?
Juggernaut.
Middle
Littleton
station.
Juggernaut.
Right.
She who must be obeyed.
Page
Something
4?
like that.
Yes, the community
Page
engagement.
4?
Yeah, I think we were just talking about the community engagement part. I thought you did a really wonderful description of what the grant was about when you gave it to council. You talked about that what this was in the lines of this was a Federal Transit Administration grant through RTD and Dr. Cog for future development and redevelopment of the station areas using a TOD. It gives the framework for where people created their comments from. And it just thought it would be nice to have it in here too so that people could have a better framework for where did the comments come from? What was the grant? What was it trying to do? Because that's where the comments came from, and it gives you a reference point of what they were commenting against.
And that's something that staff struggled with, because if you go to page 8, there is we called it the history of the plan, so maybe they're just in the wrong order. Because that was the intention there, to give you that context. But I agree, it's hard when you're on page 4 to fully appreciate that. So maybe, I'm not sure what, do we need to combine that a little bit more, or what other people have for comments on that?
I like the idea of rearranging,
Rearranging?
because you do get more in the details, like you were
Right.
talking about. But when people look at the front, and someone else talked about this, is having the executive summary kind of a thing. Some people want to just read that executive summary and not go through all the rest, and they don't want to go farther to page 8 to find the executive summary sort of stuff.
Who's gonna read this?
We are.
Yeah, that was my question.
is it
When I was reading
developed-
the introduction,
Is
is this for us? Is this for the public?
Well, all right, I assume we're going to have some representatives on the this Pell group. That's, who represents the city during this process?
So
Who
once
goes
we
to the
get to
meetings?
the working on with CDOT in this, it will be Public Works that will be taking the lead. I'm not sure the role specifically of the Planning Commission at the moment, but I do think that based on your previous conversation that we do need more education and awareness about the process, so I would like to get that brought before Planning Commission so we have that context. I agree with that. But I don't believe, Planning Commission will not be in charge of the PEL.
No, no, not in charge, but would we
Well,
have like a citizen rep? Would we have a
They'll
planning
probably,
commission
yes,
rep?
they'll all be part of that. I just don't personally know all of the details
you
at
said
the
you-
moment. But yes, certainly Public Works, as we start and do that engagement, community engagement is part of that. Council is part of that, as well as the regional partners and, all of those conversations and Dr. Cobb, all of that has to be part of it.
So the roundabout way of answering your question is who's going to read it? The representative, the people, city people representing the interest of Littleton this will be a document that they have.
Oh, and be
and
used
fight
as
for
part of,
what
I'm
we
sorry, I
want.
misunderstood. This framework can be used for that exact purpose of when we get to the PEL process, it can be used as reference and, direction for making decisions around that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
But it won't be the only thing that's part of that project
No,
or
it's,
process.
obviously there'll be a massive amount of information that they'll be throwing at the
And community
at the group.
input and maybe even, a committee that helps. I don't.
So this becomes a policy document for staff, is what we're seeking to
Becomes
create?
part of the framework for when the PEL comes forward. This can provide some direction, yes.
Jocelyn, I'm not sure I'm not sure I understand that by virtue of the fact that this thing pretty much says we have to do the Pell because we don't have any way to figure out traffic flows in this area, that there's some critical attribute of the mineral area station plan, which is traffic that can only be solved by a Pell. So if what you're saying is that this is a framework for our input into the Pell, and all this thing really says is we need a Pell to figure out mineral area station plan, I don't think that's really what this can be used for. Because we don't even know what the Pell needs.
Well, no, what I'm saying to you is PEL is one of the next steps that has to happen. That will come up with answers for how we're solving the traffic problem in this area of the city, right?
As I understood it from what I
So-
looked at, it was they will take project ideas at some level. I'm sure they have to get fairly granular. But somebody comes up with a project like one way to solve the problem would be a flyover from Mineral to Santa Fe. I'm just making this up. But I think that's what they're trying to accomplish in the Pell. If
Right.
that's true, then this framework for mineral area station plan would say something along the lines of assume traffic is merged from Mineral on to Santa Fe with a flyover.
This
What
is
do we want
higher
to see then
level.
for the stationary
No. This is supposed to be a higher level. You're right. The PEL process will start the whole conversation of South Santa Fe and how are we managing that with the future traffic, right? And including the intersection of Mineral and Santa Fe.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
This document, whatever we call it, is not going to be the basis to create the PEL.
No.
This can give some higher level direction on community engagement that we got a couple of years ago to help start that conversation. So it's not going to replace it or be the basis for that.
Which I agree with that, but what you're sort of saying is this is something that borders on a context document for purposes of input into that process.
But it's also, just like I call our comprehensive plan a prologue. It's only a prologue. It hasn't been fleshed out yet with all the other things we need: neighborhood plans, corridor studies, activity center studies that will make it a whole. This is a prologue to, in my mind, down the road doing a master plan for that area, which we started out wanting to do and then we held up. So it has value. It'll give us a framework for completing that master plan. So there's several readers here, future planning commissioners that are working on that master plan. It's also a good read for people that are going to be involved with the corridor study for Santa Fe or any development that's happening, especially on the west side, up and down Santa Fe.
So I think
people are going to be reading that.
The other piece that won't be reflected in this plan because it already happened, but remember the community engagement from 2016 that was provided about and where it came out that the two main issues are traffic and parking.
Right.
That all started taking place before we started talking about this PEL. So, honestly, that's helped get the city to be one of the reasons that we knew that was one of the next things that Public Works was wanting to work on, right? Because we were getting this input from them. So it's making sure that we don't lose any of the information that was created or captured from that 2016 engagement, creating it in a framework so that whether it's the PEL or any future decision for this part of the city, to Mark's point, make sure that we don't lose sight of these goals, and you know what I mean, and making sure, not that this would ever happen, but if the PEL is going down one direction, just make sure that it doesn't lose sight of some of these goals and some of those concepts, as part of that process and conversation.
Given that it's a context document, how much more specific do we need it to be? Given that there will be at the time of review, a new context in light of it. My favorite thing you just said is we don't want to lose any of the ideas that we captured.
Right.
And keep going. I 1000% agree with that. I read a lot of stuff.
Right.
In my life. And I don't and I appreciate the professionalism that is put into every sentence. But I just wonder if at some point is enough to say this is the context. And at liberty or at risk of saying, speak now or forever hold your peace, let's get all of our points in there and get them down and be done with it. But as a context document, when you say context document, I think overview, I don't know how much more specific this needs to be.
Or maybe too specific.
I would accuse us in the citywide plan, and I was one of the people who advocated for it, we put a bunch of stats in there about Littleton and pictures and graphs, and I can pull it out if you don't know what I'm talking about. And that was really important on that day. And now they're irrelevant. Probably should be updated for lack of any other purpose.
Finished it? It's got to be updated, all right.
No, that's going to take an act together. May I make a motion that we update the graphics to the current year?
No, we can do that.
Hopefully that one can pass.
Being the Planning Commission poet laureate, do you want to redo any of your phrases that you have in the comp plan? And decide.
If you're offering me a chance to rewrite the comp plan, sure. I'll do Goddard neighborhood.
Yeah, above all others. What page are we up to?
24.
So you agree with Andrew then, huh?
6 to go.
86?
6?
I have a couple questions start ahead instead of me like.
I don't have anything for those
Yeah,
pages.
Okay, so I had one concern about, you were talking about how in the community engagement aspect of it, the community engagement came from that grant that we were given through the Federal Transit Authority and then, of course, through Dr. Cog and RTD, and it only considered a TOD. There was no innovation in it. There was no open discussion or format about looking at anything other than that. So the comments from our community was just strictly based on a TOD, and that presents a bias in, what they're talking to us about. So part of me wonders about, the community input, of course, has great value, and I think these are probably general enough, but is there an inherent bias when you only look at one plan? You're not looking at anything other, there's no other conversation on what else to do with it. That creates an inherent bias. And I don't know if that should just be recognized, or, it would have been one thing if that grant allowed an innovative approach and you could have done anything they wanted, but it didn't. There was only one thing they could look at. And that's all the community got to look at, and the community wasn't even mentioned to the community that this is all we can do because the contract is a 125-page contract. I doubt anyone in the community read it, perhaps except me. And in it where it says, you can only do this. These are the things that we can do. And that's what Puma did, of course, because that's all they could do. So the community can only comment on what was put in front of it. And there were so many other things that could have happened with this land that the community had no input on because it wasn't even presented. So in the framework, I'm just wondering if something like that should be included, that this was just limited to a very specific design, and it didn't go any farther. And so the comments are based on that.
I'm not sure I understand. Because it is a transit station, so what are these other things that you're thinking the community didn't get to comment on? Because I went to a few of those, and it was parking, too much traffic, and that would have come out on anything, regardless of whether it was TOD or not.
I agree that is the biggest things that came out, and so, but the community, if you had someone come in and look at that piece of property and said, okay, what is the best thing to do with this? We never did that. That was never happened.
Transit-oriented transit station.
One of the ideas that we could just rip it up and build a park?
I'm sorry, what?
I guess I agree that. I'm not sure what else. It was already built out. It's just a question of how are we going to, expand upon it.
Well, what's not built out is the parking lot, and that was where a lot of, that
Well,
whole thing that Puma gave us was how that parking lot would look.
Yeah.
And the only thing that was considered was TOD. And I'm not saying that's
transit-oriented
development.
Right.
And it's not to say that that's the wrong thing to do, but it's the only thing that was looked at.
Yeah.
And, and here, as we get deeper into this framework, it talks about the unique of this place. It's a unique place. We've got the river and the park, and most transit-oriented development places don't have anything like that there. They're just urban areas. And we never explored that. It's talked about in here that we have the opportunity for uniqueness, but that was never explored. And that's my only point, is the comments that the community gave is just based on one idea and nothing else.
Those ideas are not going to be in this report here.
I'm not saying they should be in this report.
We're not
I'm
going
just
to
saying the
have
report.
Puma's plans show up. The three versions that were quite dense at the time.
Right, because they only looked at one thing.
They're gone. They shouldn't even appear in this framework.
But the aspect of TOD occurs throughout this entire thing. If you look at, just going forward on, you look at, you got Dr. Cog, you got the citywide plan when you get into the comp plan, the mineral station, the ULI, the South Platte River Corridor, the Santa Fe Quarter Plan, they all say this should be a TOD. So this framework is already heavily...
Transit development could be parking garages or
Actually, when you look at the
parking
definition,
garages with
if
a
you
couple
look at the definition of...
pads. It doesn't need to be Puma's vision of 5, 6, 7 stories.
If you look at the definition of a TOD, it is you can be general, but it's offices, it's high density, it's retail, and of course you have the parking and the area shared.
and housing.
The only thing it's not is industrial. Apartments, parking, office, retail.
Right.
That's pretty much all of them.
All of this here just says basically that all these documents, plans, all agree that this should be TOD. I'm just saying that I either, acknowledge it, that we are looking elsewhere, or that these are all top-heavy towards that. And that's not the only thing we can do. If we really want to look at what the community said, they want our river to be protected. They want that river to be emphasized. But if you put a TOD there, the river gets lost.
It's already there.
No, the TOD is not there.
What I'm saying is there's already buses and light rail there. It's already transit. So
But that's not TOD. That's not
anything you
TOD.
do around there is transit oriented.
What if
Why?
just be so bold to say, so everything that says here's what we want. Why don't we add a section, or I would offer to add a section of what we don't want. Comments from the community have spoken and the following themes have arisen, and be very clear in our presentation of those. Giving us the space then to say, this is how it fits. We say it here in the citywide plan, which definitely says this, but this isn't, sometimes the fear factor is a little better. The negative factor is a little more powerful or more direct to the point. What we don't want is high rises.
Define high rise. I mean, does that mean 12 stories? Is that 4 stories? Is that?
3 stories?
I've learned that 12 means 11.
Yeah.
And what does it mean when the community says they want the river protected? What does that mean in the sense of compared to all of the emphasis and push to be a transit-oriented development, which is usually high density with taller buildings? So if this is about what the community said, and so that's the only reason I'm bringing this up, is the community said they want our river protected, they want the river emphasized, they want this river to be a part of this. Is that compatible with what a lot of these other plans here are talking about? I don't know. That's just something.
But is that compatible with the goals that we get to? I mean, I feel like we're having
Absolutely.
this big discussion about something that should be in the goals and the things that the plan's trying to accomplish, and we're still in the background section. I mean, the question is,
Okay.
does the plan itself say, hey, we want to accomplish these things? And there are things that talk about preserving connections to the river. There are things that talk about, the value of the views in this area once you get to the actual goals and objectives.
Agreed. But it's very top-heavy towards looking at what a TOD is before you even get there. That's my only comment.
Yeah. And I feel that's very appropriate given that we're sitting right next to a transit station.
But the plan also talks about, and the people also talk about, wanting to be unique and wanting to protect our river. Are those compatible? And I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if you look at the community engagement appendix, it has a lot of stuff on the river. I mean,
Protected views.
yeah, beautiful views and uncluttered skyline, walkability, convenient, Carson Nature Center, bridge connection across Santa Fe to the mountain, South Platte Park, pedestrian bridge, blah, 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 blah. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here about the setting of or there was a lot of stuff in the engagement piece. I thought and I agree, I mean, I think this is all background information that's going to get fleshed out again at some point in time. But I mean, TOD was a broad concept. I mean, the truth of the matter is it's TOD. How that ends up looking, if you got 50,000 cars a day going up to 75 or 100, it's going to be that. And the question is, how do we put a boundary on it so that it doesn't encroach? But I think, to me, it came out really loud and clear in the community engagement results from 2016 that people didn't want this thing getting too close to the river. And I think it's sort of out there already, quite honestly.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just talking about the compatibility and showing these things juxtaposition. Are they actually compatible? That's all.
Okay.
I can skip up to page 8. I think
Can I make one? I did have a question on 6. Jocelyn, you've got in here the DRCOG, the MetroVision component.
Excuse me.
They sort of got dropped in here. They're, I think, going to be important, but I think we need to do some dot connecting in terms of what they mean and what they don't mean. They sort of got just sort of plopped in here as something that's an overlay. If this is a regional, going to end up having regional attributes, then Dr. Cog, certainly as a funding source, is going to probably come into play. But my understanding of these things is that we get a lot of control and say over what does and doesn't happen. But other than saying it's out there, there's not a lot of explanation as to, again, how the entire process we're looking at here, what that does for us, doesn't do for us, provides for us, doesn't provide for us, so forth and so on.
So you're saying to add more into the intro as to why there are all these additional planning?
Well, I guess I don't overtly,
documents?
the general reader, I don't know, is after we say that this thing exists, the MetroVision, saying that it exists doesn't provide a whole lot of context in terms of what it means to what we're trying to accomplish. So if there's a way to sort of say what having that thing out there does in the context of this framework, beyond just saying it exists, I think would be helpful.
Maybe 2 sentences or less addition, no more.
It doesn't have to go, you don't have to go deep.
You
I
got
mean,
a full page on that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be in tone, but I don't think it's...
Got it. Explained very well, clearly as to why it's in
Well, there's
this.
no connecting of the dots.
Anybody else on
Let's try
6,
that
7? Good, I can go up to number 8. There was, to my mind, the best sentence in this whole document is the following. It's in the middle there. Plan goes on to describe how a partnership might be formed with a developer, with probably should say with developers, to offer incentives, river-friendly, mixed-use development that takes advantage of the transit stop at Mineral and that also protects some portion of the site as a buffer to South Platte Park. To me, that's the essence of any kind of building structures that go into this in this half-mile circle. I just love that. I love that sentence.
But same sort of issue. I mean, what is that? Partnership's a great word, but what exactly does it mean? I mean, do we have any idea or concept as to what an incentive for a river-friendly mixed-use development might actually be?
It means the same thing as framework.
Yes.
Sort of.
Until there is a market, until there is a buyer and a seller and a something to discuss.
Maybe it's a great idea, but yeah, the devil's in the detail.
Every development that's going to happen, they're going to want something from the city, and that's our chance to perhaps do a little jawboning go for what we want here. Sure, it's our chance.
Sure.
I think that's kind of what it's saying.
If the developer perceives that jet skis coming straight out of your back patio is a river-friendly mixed use, there could be a market argument for that or for against it. If the entire jet ski community shows up and says, we love this idea, right? So there's always that risk. You'd hope some form of logic would step in, and everything previous says conserve, conserve, protect, protect. I agree with you, Mark. I actually think move that sentence to the top, put it on the cover page. You know, that's what is intended to happen. That developer could also be somebody who wants to buy it and turn it into a giant nature preserve.
So the developer, we're referring to the Elser property
Largely.
largely. Well, there's also what's going to be done with the surface parking there too, which is more of a regional transportation community input to what's happening there. So there's kind of a couple different aspects of major changes that could happen there.
The buffer,
Will happen there.
buffer there already exists.
Right, there's a buffer there.
Up to 7-Eleven.
Yeah, well, I think it goes adjacent and beyond, down pretty close to Carson Nacer Center for the unpaid parking portion. And then the paid parking portion is the other side of that street. So there could be some more buffer carved out down there potentially.
It would only be a height restriction that you could really implement on a parking garage, but other than that,
It just, to me, it just says setback.
Or additional setback.
There's a buffer, it says buffer to South Platte Park. So that
Well, I
would
think
mean
that-
a setback from whatever got developed.
Let's take some for instance.
I'll work on trying to enhance this section a little bit more, because the idea here was to recognize that there are these additional planning documents that are already out in the community, and to the point of trying to get everything, you know what I mean, like in one place. These are some resources that we should look to for future decision-making on whatever the topic is in that city. So that was the idea, so maybe I could add some more context
Yeah.
to that.
A couple of instances where we could have some say in it. Let's say a guy wants to put on the RTD lot, they want to put a parking garage right up to the western boundary, 3-4 stories high. We say, no, here's our framework that says we want a river-oriented development there. It's okay for those developments to be close to the park because they're like a restaurant with a massive plaza overlooking the river. It's a museum of the Platte that has a plaza on the rear where they have reenactments of the settlers going up and down the Platte. Those uses, those are buffers in my mind. They're not giant parking garages.
Well, even if you look at the Sundown property, which includes Angelo's, designed by Sundown Building, and Breckenridge Brewery, if you ride by there on the park side, that designed by Sundown Building is pretty close to the park,
Yeah.
but it looks like a building that belongs there. You know, it doesn't look like a parking garage or an office building. It looks like a nice building that somebody designed to fit in, you know, it almost looks like an old barn, but it looks really nice. I mean, they designed it really well. And same with Breckenridge Brewery, I mean, they call it the farmhouse. So kind of that kind of thing like you're talking about, where it could be closer than those are, but something that looks like it fits, not just a wall, like you're saying.
Rural vernacular.
There you go.
And it doesn't block the public for the for
Yeah.
enjoyment of the views and of the river and of the mountains. Those uses are pushed forward, towards the east. You end up doing more density, and you're more sensitive to the river, but you can still develop it. And again, we got to keep remembering that it ain't just the transit station. It's Enzer. It's to the north. Eventually, this framework could go further up and down the west side of Santa Fe. So don't get bogged down just thinking of the transit station when we talk about development.
There's nothing to say that some guy can't come along my Aspen Grove, bulldoze it, and put it whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Is it zoned?
Right, yeah, it's got the zoning for it.
Should that day ever come?
Make it better.
Or,
Well, I think there's maybe we could look at it in that there's 3 development components that are likely. There's expansion of the existing roadways or alteration of Mineral Santa Fe intersection. There's that component. There's the parking area for the light rail station, whatever development that may be additional parking, underground, above ground, plus retail, mixed use, and then the answer. So if maybe we add just a slight framework to those areas, then we could add some more details to what is or is not desirable in those areas.
further in, we have that opportunity when we get into those 4 groups, design and transportation, planning.
Well, maybe sort of what you were saying as well, but I guess part of this though is that the market cycle timing sort of, there's a mismatch here because NSER's sort of in the process of developing now, based on what we saw from that floodplain thing a couple weeks ago, right? So, I mean, the RTD lot, we've said from a market cycle standpoint, isn't going to develop in this cycle, which pushes it out 10 years. So the reality of the timing of this stuff, if I'm interpreting this somewhat correctly, is NSER is going to happen. And I don't know that unless they come in for a rezone, which I'm assuming they won't, isn't much that we can, there is pretty much nothing we can do.
There's some things we can do, I think.
At the margins, maybe, in terms of the subdivision plats and this kind of stuff.
No, they've got a use by right. They
Right.
had a lot of square footage to build, and they've got a chance to
But
move their retail and their commercial and their residential around as they see fit almost.
True, but it's going to happen in the next couple of years, probably, right? Because, I mean, it looks like they're ready to go. Or they're getting close to being ready to go because they're coming in and starting to ask for things like floodplain, variance approval, and I forget what it's called. What we approved a couple weeks ago.
Right, special exemption.
Special exemption certificate, yeah.
You can't force them to do anything really because
That's my point.
They got the zoning. But if I were a typical developer, I'd want to know what does the community want, and this document could give them some framework as to what we would like to see there. And by the way, do what the citizens want. Make more money. Hello. And there's some good ideas we can give them versus their cookie cutter. We're going to put up the big box here, and the loading and the trash is going to be along the plat.
Well, I think under ideal laboratory conditions that's correct, but I mean, I guess my sense from what I was interpreting from the floodplain discussion we had, they've already got an idea what they're going to do. Whether this thing exists or not, and it certainly doesn't incorporate anything that the Pell might come up with. And it certainly is going to be 10 years before mineral redevelops. So I think doing this is absolutely important and appropriate, but I don't know what, and maybe I'll ask you, what do you see from our consideration of this document and this process and the precursor for this PEL, which is going to start this spring or whenever? What's the timing of what's going on with the NSER development as it stands today? I mean, there's nothing that they're not looking at this to modify anything they're thinking about doing, or are they? Or have you discussed any of that with them?
Well, so at this point, what we know is that the Northern 30, which is the special exception that you guys had in front of you a couple weeks ago.
For the floodplain.
For the floodplain, right? That northern portion, that's the only piece that and that's they have that in a subdivision application in.
Okay.
So they will be purchasing that 70 acres or so on the northern portion. The southern portion did have an application in. That portion of the property also would need to come through for special exception permits, and they're no longer under contract with the developer. So those applications they will expire if they don't resubmit, or until they tell us, the owner or someone, that they're either moving forward or not. Those are kind of out there, last we know. And those are the only conversations we've had to date with the North group.
Does the Northern 30, the culvert that we approved, right? Does that constitute a buffer?
Buffer from what?
A road. As we talk about buffers and screening and stuff like that, would the parcel immediately to the south of that also have to put some sort of buffering there? Or would that first section constitute a buffer?
I guess I'm not sure what you're meaning in regard to the special exception. The
We put a
portion-
drainage ditch.
So the northern portion has its own special exception. The southern is Dad Clark Gulch. That also will need to come in for a special exception. So if you're asking for a buffer, I'm not sure what you're asking for. So this is relevant.
This, right here, we approved to put a ditch
Right.
right there. Does that constitute a buffer from this parcel?
I'm not sure.
As we talk about bufferings and screenings and natures and preserves. And
I guess in theory, but
Andrew, you
I don't know what we're,
I think the buffering's talking about buffering the South Platte Park and the Green Mary Carter.
right.
But I mean, what you're talking about runs east-west, where the Mary Carter's gonna run north-south. I mean, at the south, at the west end of that
If our,
parcel, he's gotta buffer it out some way, and maybe they are just because you're gonna leave it open because it's floodplain. But he's still gonna put in apartments, right? I mean, that's what they were talking about.
The plans that were submitted showing that buffer, you could see lightly the roadways and residential units being put in there, so.
Yeah.
We
right
have
up to,
conceptual, plans that were given to
they
the
gave
city.
us some conceptual ideas. Now, whether those were not evaluated based on the existing PD or if that would need an amendment, right? So there's been no development application that has been.
They were just kind of showing what might
They
go
had
in
to
there.
show
It shows
some.
the bridge across, the drainage swale that was put in there, and then some kind of outlines of some structures.
Yeah, but the guys that were presenting build apartments. So they're probably not gonna build commercial. Okay.
That's what it looked like on the plans as well.
Yeah, that's kind of my interpretation. Well, anyway, Mark, all I'm saying is,
Yep.
this is probably going way off the rails. The answer piece of this may be pretty much, it is what it is almost. I mean, we may be considering the mineral component
Only, yeah.
only and/or a redevelopment of Aspen Grove, I guess, given the timing of the thing. So I don't, again, this sort of comes back to, in terms of a framework conversation, I'm not opposed to talking about some of these other attributes.
Well, I'm holding out a little more hope than maybe you. Wasn't there a possibility they'd be willing to go through this, the 4P process, whatever that's called?
Well, yeah, but I guess let's get back to what we're actually, we're trying to talk about the framework plan itself, and maybe there's some component for, the idea is that this document, in its context, can be, really, what's going to be the most useful piece once it's approved will be getting into the chapters. Now, I agree, now maybe we need to restructure those a little bit more. What about the goals and the action steps? That's the,
Right, we need to get to
probably
the
the
goals.
focus of, as future decisions are made for this portion of the city, that's where perhaps you can take some direction from this plan. That's the intent of what is being presented to you. I know there's just a lot of answers we don't know about undeveloped property south of Mineral, and yeah, that is a big deal. But at this point in time, we just honestly don't know a lot of the details. So if you think about it, looking at these goals and some action steps, this document, if it does move forward and if it is approved by council, then could be in place so that as future conversations are being held, and we are using it to help provide some of that direction, whether it's to Enser or Aspen Grove gets redeveloped, or heck, who knows what else. The Carson Nature Center wants to do something different. I don't really know. RTD wants to do something with their parking lot.
I think the problem, we're used to dealing with things that are somewhat granular when we make land use decisions and these types of things. I kind of think Andrew's point about maybe maybe it is what it is. Maybe it's okay at this level with a few, tweaks to your goals or action plan items kind of thing, because it pretty much does what what you're saying it sort of needs to do, which is just set the context. I don't know. There's a lot of, we just don't know a lot.
That's the hard thing.
My tweaks are 15 sentences tops. I'm not looking at writing another 20 pages of this sucker.
John's head.
Yeah, you might.
Maybe move on to any more on page 11? Is there only like a sentence?
I think that, the acknowledgements,
Just even anything else?
the history is well done. Does anybody really have a problem with the history of the plan? Good, let's move forward. Now we get into the fun parts.
Chapter 2.
Okay, chapter 2, is there any questions about that? It is kind of what it is.
It's kind of describes the process and what's going to.
Well, I'm sorry, I interrupted. Finish your thought. Were you going to say something?
I can wait till you're done.
Well, all right. I just think, and I don't want to belabor this, but this, yeah, but I will anyway, because hey, that's how I roll.
Sorry.
No, it was a fair point, well presented. I think this isn't bad. It talks about what the thing is, but we don't know what we don't know when it comes to this thing, and I think it would be pertinent to at least put a link to their handbook that somebody could go and say, hey, if you really want more detailed information, here's 150 pages you can read. It's up to you, but there's a lot of stuff underneath this that's, I think the whole thing could be a gigantic landmine. I just don't know how to manage not stepping on it.
I think it's well done as is.
Dave.
There's enough information specifically about the area. There's also a little background on what the hell a Pell is, and boom, you're out of there.
It's fine.
See a problem? Anybody see a problem with it?
I think it's
It's just maybe like a consideration in our comp plan. It talks about supporting Santa Fe to be widened to 6 lanes. And is that something that would go appropriate here since it's part of our comp plan? That was just that. And the other thing is, here it talks about carrying the 50,000 vehicles a day through Littleton. There's 3 places where it talks about how many vehicles, and they all say something different. One says 50, one says 51, one says 52,000. And then there's a place where it talks about Mineral having 25,000 or 26,000. And they're on different pages. My suggestion is just to have them all say the same. So this is the first place that it talks about the 50. And then there's 2 other places where it talks about the 50, but it says 51 and one says 52. One of them is the map.
50 plus.
Yeah, so it just so they all say the same thing. No. And the same thing when it talks about minerals, it's one place. It's not here, but in one place it says 25, and the other place it says 26 and 300. So that's fun. And I have them marked here. I can show you later. Okay. But that was it.
Anything else on that report? I assume nobody has a problem with the study area map with quarter-mile, half-mile radius? Bruce?
Most of the Ensor property's in there.
I only had 8.
The Enzer's in there, yes.
Yeah, no, exactly.
The only thing I would just point out is that our entire discussion tonight has focused west of Santa Fe, and that little parcel there has been identified in previous meetings, and it is called out for in the document. You did mention the east of Santa Fe part, but some sort of improved connection so those people don't have to work the hill. Just not to forget that.
Next section, existing history, existing conditions, I'm sorry. Any problem with this section? I have none.
I thought that it should be added in here that according to...
Hold on. You guys are quick.
Gotcha.
You guys are quick.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
So this is the extension of the Southwest Light Rail line. It seems to me that it is important to add here that for what RTD is looking at right now, they are not thinking of extending that until, according to their own documents, beyond 2040.
Oh, a time frame?
Yes, I mean, it's one thing, we'll say they're, it's 5 years, but they're talking over 2 decades. And that has a huge impact on how we look at this piece of property. So I think it needs to be shown here about their plans.
Right, that's their time frame, or their anticipated time frame.
And I'll talk about this more later because that really is going to have an effect of, like what Andrew was saying, autonomous cars are going to change a lot of things. And if they're not looking and putting there for, over 2 decades, this could be a whole different beast by then.
Well, I think it depends too, right? I don't know a lot about this, but my understanding is that the extension that is happening, the east extension, right, to Lone Tree or whatever, that also had a longer term time frame, and then it just based on factors and funding and other people partnering with them, that ended up being shorter. So those are some other, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I agree, we should put an anticipated time frame that we know.
And it can change,
And
of
that
course.
can change for sure, based on things that are not known.
Yeah, and I think in the short term, whether it moves up to 10 years even, in the short term with Sterling Ranch being built right now, there are houses there now. That's going to front load the parking heavily over the next 5 years even. There's going to be a lot more people trying to park there, and it's going to just be a lot more crowded.
Is the Army Corps done
Little
with their
Drive.
river work?
Which river work?
The Army Corps was redoing the river.
Some river?
Are they done?
Well,
I assume
South
they're already.
The channelizing?
Group.
The South.
Yeah, they completed that section from C470 down to Mineral Avenue. And then they went actually all the way down to Reynolds Landing. So that's completed. Some of the vegetation got washed out. They may replant there, but the putting in the point bars and reconfiguring the river channel and enhancing it.
And that's protected by definition of what it is in the park and.
Yeah, it's part of South Platte Park.
Okay, that is.
Absolutely. I had just a minor typo on the last line of page 15. Looks like it says that there's a sentence there that says study area, like mineral station, many users of the mineral station live west of or close to the study area and might find, and then it just says continue to find. So I don't know if there needs to be an and in there. Just continue to find.
Yep.
Just minor.
You able to keep up with all this?
So far, I can always look at the tape.
Okay. Moving on. Let's see, up to 15, 16, thereabouts. Any comments?
On page 16, where it starts talking about, it's on the last paragraph of page 16. And it seems like this might be a place where some of this stuff for the South Platte vision might be appropriate. Some kind of acknowledgement about how this development can affect the quality of life for people who use this river. So like right now, you're walking down the river, it's so serene, you feel like you're nowhere. And how is that going to be affected by if suddenly you have 3, 4, 5-story buildings coming on? In the South Platte vision, it talks about that this particular area, that they're trying to restore it back to its natural function, which is what John was talking about, and creating pools, they're revegetating it, they're trying to keep this really scenic, and already it talks about the managers of South Platte Park have identified overuse as a concern. This is all in the vision. Maybe some acknowledgement about this is a potential issue. Because if you build a bunch of homes or offices, that is going to dramatically affect this little portion of our river, and, you know, for this particular vision where they're talking about keeping it natural, how's it going to affect the fact that, you know, the wildlife there, the biodiversity there, and just us as citizens walking down there and wanting to be out in the middle of nowhere, so-called nowhere, of course, because you feel like when you're walking there, you are in nature. You don't feel like you're in a city. How would that be affected by that type of development? You know, when you look at this South Platte vision, it talks about, you know, the metro area, $25 million they're putting into our river, not just this area, but the whole river, to make it this beautiful, pristine place. That is going to be affected by what development goes there, particularly if it's a true TOD of some sort, which is what it seems like people here are thinking it will be. So maybe some information on that if people think that's important. I mean, I do, because that river is one of the reasons why people live here.
There's a way to tie it into the background, because that sounds more like a vision for the future that you're
Well, I think I just made
That's
notes
further
where I
in.
think both of
Oh, I
them
see what you
back.
Yeah.
Maybe it's further on, and
Put that
also
more towards when it, okay.
also
Just some acknowledgement of that, about how we need to look at that. That has to be really present when we're looking at that development.
Yeah, so I think holding that thought for when we
betcha.
get into those further chapters, and then
You bet.
maybe the other thing I wrote down is this is just trying to be more, here's the facts, the right now. I think to your point, to make sure when we talk about the South Platte River Corridor Vision Plan and introduce it in that beginning, that we really make sure that we're talking about the vision, and that is clear in there. So I'll look at that piece as well.
Thank you.
Based on those comments.
Just one comment, and then we'll go on. It's been the dilemma of every planning commission that I've been on, how to handle the river and to keep it as people want, kind of free and open, and feels like you're out in the country. But opposing that is the developmental rights along the eastern edge. How do you placate the two? How do you bring them together? And that has been a bugaboo for as long as I've been on the planning commission. And sometimes it's handled well, other times it's handled ham-handed. Sometimes it's handled just because it's used by right, and somebody buys a land and goes to the building department, gets a permit, and builds. Littleton's answer is to continually purchasing more and more buffer areas, but I mean, some people in Littleton want a buffer area all the way to Santa Fe Drive, period.
I think we can safely say that will not happen.
That will not happen, right?
Just to have it acknowledged. I mean, because if this is a conceptual plan, this is a conceptual plan. We've got these different conceptual plans. I think we need to integrate them so that we're looking at a big picture instead of one piece here, one piece there. That's all.
But, so goals and, the goals, action,
Yep.
et cetera.
Yeah, I think
those
that's
are
a
good
good idea of
comments.
moving it
Yep.
later. I think you're right.
I just have one factual comment on the bottom of page 16. You start off the last sentence, Mary Carter is a paved multi-use trail. I'd say something like Mary Carter Greenway. But the trail actually, Mary Carter actually goes up through Sheridan and doesn't become the South Platte River Trail until Denver County. And you say it just north of Englewood or
Oh, so it's through.
at Englewood, it becomes South Platte River Trail, and it doesn't until it goes through Englewood, through Sheridan, then
Yep.
it becomes, it's all of Arapahoe County.
Good point. Yep.
Okay,
17?
17.
18?
18?
I do have just an idea on 18. You know, when you're talking about the market-driven scenario versus a value capture-driven scenario, I don't know, would there be any benefit, and I throw this out to the group too, just having a little more detail of what does a value capture scenario look like? Or do you think that's just too much detail? I mean, in their actual assessment, you know, they go into how they see the value capture scenario, and I wonder, most people can comprehend market, but what does value capture scenario look like?
Add more.
One more sentence to
Yeah, I'm
describe
not
it.
looking for like the 3 pages they wrote on it. Just,
On what it
it
is.
might be beneficial and it might not. I just throw that out as something.
Anything there?
This is just one of the places where they have the 51 and the 25. It's just a place to note where clearing up the consistency. And then the next page is the map, and that also is one of the places where it's inconsistent with that other first page. The map on page 20 versus 19 where they talk about the numbers.
Thank you. Anything on 19?
Sorry?
19?
Yeah, 19. Now we're kind of getting into the fun part here. I have 2 or 3 items. Anybody starting out have anything? See, none? Strengths and opportunities. I had, after 7, I had number 8, the potential for complementary development at NSER. I want to bring up NSER more in this report, or this framework. That to me is a possible opportunity. Can't read my second one, so I'll skip that. Challenges in the study area. Yeah, we'll skip that. That's covered elsewhere. Well, one that I have for a challenge is potential heavy development at the station in NSER, adding to congestion. But really, you've kind of covered that elsewhere.
You want to put possible challenge in there for what Robin was saying about development encroaching on the park?
It's a good spot to put it, yeah. One sentence, one line long, yeah.
I can expound on that.
Recess. Anything else on
So is it
19?
development
Development encroaching on the...
or people encroachment, or both?
I think
It was more the development, encroachment, and how we deal with that.
yeah, I think that was the main issue, was sort of what you and Mark were saying about, stuff gets pushed down
Natural habitat.
to where it's more dense and impactful.
And how does it affect the people using the park?
Yeah, there you go.
And just because part of the community engagement was the protection of our park. I mean, we had those 3 big issues, the traffic, the parking, and the park. Seems important.
Just want to make sure I have the right words.
Okay, transportation.
So this is where I have a comment that reflects what Andrew brought up. I avoided mentioning it as kind of the general overview as kind of more of a specific thing, but the lack of a discussion of disruptive transportation technologies, specifically the autonomous vehicles that could come online. And some forward-looking individuals in the technology industry indicate that there could be 10 million autonomous vehicles on the road in just a few years, and by 2050, possibly entire communities will be autonomous. So hugely disruptive. Not many people probably really understand it. Within the timing framework of potential developments of a parking structure, additional parking, things could change. So I think that needs to be addressed in this section.
Use the word destructive.
Disruptive.
Oh, disruptive. Okay, and that what do they call out? Capitalism, creative destruction, and recreation. But it seems a little bit harsh. Is there? It has the tone that like it's bad. We got to keep the horse and buggy that we got now.
Well, disruptive, that's kind of the term that they use.
That's the industry
It's a
buzzword.
I know it's an industry buzzword, but we want to use industry buzzwords in a document like this.
No, I'm not saying we need to use the word disruptive technology. I was just saying that is a type of technology that causes.
Oh, I know what it
social
means, but I'm just saying to the,
change.
could it be, change it, softer?
Absolutely, yeah. But I think just
Or an in-between word.
the main point is that that technology is coming online and could be significantly impact what's needed as far as.
You alluded to as well.
No, and some of the stuff I've read and knew you were going exactly down this path, but the concept of parking in general may change by virtue of the fact that if everything's a self-driving vehicle and you've got a phone app, you just push the app. When you want to go from here to there, you get out of the car motor's off.
Absolutely.
And then when you want to go back, you get a different car to take you back. There's no need for parking because they're just always circulating.
And there's less need for automobile dealerships as well, because people aren't buying cars. Certainly, those of us want to travel to another state or something, probably are going to still have a car. But for a lot of individuals to be commuting within the metro area, they may not be using a car at all.
We just don't know. That's the big thing.
Right.
In an APA email, there was a really interesting article they had that I read, and it talked about autonomous cars and light rail. And it was just saying that autonomous driving will dramatically change how we live, particularly in suburbia, where the dominant form of mobility is cars. It talks about that autonomous cars may take the economic strain off metro mass transit systems, which could then focus on service improvements within the core, rather than stretching outward. And that affects us in the sense of Lucent. That's what some of the research was showing. Again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But it just seems good to include this is a factor.
Yeah, I think the PEL will probably address, I'm hoping, some significant details on that. And but having this in here will make sure that people are aware of that.
That's a good idea. I agree.
I had only one comment in action steps for traffic, and that is number 6, park and trail connections. I've heard repeatedly over the years that South Suburban wants to limit the number of connections or trails into the park to keep them and well-defined and evenly spaced, but they don't want multiple connections into the park. It's very disruptive to the park. So maybe a half a sentence or a sentence to that effect in number 6. Improving connections, kind of the tone is also adding on to them, and that's not the goal of South Suburban.
I don't think that was the intention here, so, because I agree, but it was making sure we work with South Suburban so that we're all on the same page and create the appropriate,
Whether you want to slip that in somewhere here or elsewhere, again,
defining or somehow
controlling, whatever word you want to use. Because it comes up every time we talk about the park.
Question about goal 7 when you're ready. Okay, yep. It talks about balancing for parking with the desire to encourage people to use alternative transportation. Number 7, and since this, I'm sorry, on goals. Sorry, page 21, goal about parking. It almost sounds like it's discouraging parking because they want people to get another way to go there, but this is for people to use an alternative mode of transportation, to use a light rail. It almost seems like it's discouraging parking when our need is parking. I just don't like the way it's said in that sense, because we want to encourage people to use the light rail, right? So we want to make sure there's parking for people to get there. If you start making people bike to light rail, and you're going to get people who aren't going to do it. So I'm a little leery about how that's worded. Here, I think it's said really nicely. In number 5 for the action steps, in coordination with the expansion of the light rail system to Lucent Boulevard, create a plan for adequate parking to be provided. I think that said well, and that doesn't sound so hot.
Yep. I'll redo that. Action step, what's the intent?
Yeah, it says it well. I mean, the biggest, one of the, top 3 is parking.
Bruce?
I'm like, it's nothing but a wordsmithing, but traffic mitigation, I don't think we're going to mitigate traffic. I think the issue ends up being, how do you keep traffic flow as efficient as possible? So if you don't want to change it,
No,
Is that,
we can do
is that in the goals you're looking at?
yeah, well, under action steps.
Oh,
It says that in goals too.
It's on goals as well, yep.
It says that in goals too, number 6.
Okay, yep.
Oh, mitigate, there you go, missed that one.
well, it's one of the comments about the, the fact that in the goals it just says, mitigate the existing and projected traffic volume. That's not the same as saying eliminate or reduce traffic. It's sort of acknowledging that with the increase in population, we're just going to see more and more traffic in this area. And
Yeah.
it's
The goal-
nibbling around the edges where we can.
Yeah, yeah. The goal of mitigating the negative impacts sounds okay to me, but I think the idea of absolute traffic mitigation is probably not going to happen.
Andrew, you mentioned that there's no way the railroad's ever going to move to the east out of the corridor. I know I've read years ago about there's long-term plans for that. Do you have any additional info on that?
I have no info. What I would say is I'm completely under the impression that Union Pacific owns the land and has since 1840 something.
They're not in the habit of giving up land.
They own the dirt under your house and mine, and there's no mineral rights for us, so.
Yeah,
It's possible.
possible, but it's
If I were to draw a line, I could say maybe you can move it across the way there. I don't know. I don't see any. The only thing I think that would, because there's no flat. The reason it's there is because it was along a river, right? In 1820, some surveyor said put it here. And that's what happened. I don't think there's any other, so long as heavy rail is a dominant form of logistics, I don't see any other place that could go. As well as how are we going to get all the boxes to the Walmart that's going down at Sterling Ranch and the other 5 of them? It's going to have to get there somehow. So I
haven't heard anything recent on it, but there's, what I did read about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, was way out in Aurora, a huge bypass around the metro area.
I'll see if I can find what I read, just as a FYI, but they did, and I can't remember the name, but they recently added improvements, technological improvements along that rail line for heavy freight. So whatever that's one of the regional lines in the West that has that new technology, so it's safer and better. But again, I'm sorry, I'll see if I can find what I read, but I can.
adding to the likelihood that it's not going.
I'll see if I can find that, because I
In
cannot.
our lifetime,
recall
it sounds
all.
like it's not going.
Jocelyn, I think it's called Positive Traction Control, PTC.
Yes, I think that's it, you're right,
And it's expensive. But it's designed to
to be.
break them, to keep the things from getting out of control. It avoids accidents and so forth and so on.
One thing that I might suggest for usability and readability is, and I keep struggling with, under action steps, walkable is not an action step. So my thinking is creating a table where it's got goals and then action steps next to it, because each of these goals has an action step, and I think that'll help all of us clarify what the words mean, and every goal should have an action step next to it. So I think just table format would be much easier.
You know,
Yes, or one thing, we went back and forth on this, so, or is it table or just here's the goal and then underneath it,
Right.
there's the 3 or 2 or whatever
Something's
action
in
steps?
italics, and then you have the answer.
Would that make it easier so you're not going one page to the next?
Is there
Or is table a
Really
better?
good idea, yeah.
Is there a goal specifically omitted from here? Is there a goal specifically omitted from here? It was 1, 3, 5.
Oh, just to see how well planners count it, you know.
You can't count past one hand.
I don't think so,
And-
but
and
I'll
to-
look, because 4 is missing too.
Yeah,
Besides the numbering, some of the goals here do not have action steps. Like goal 1, 3, and 8 don't actually have a counter action step.
Not called that same thing, so that's.
They sort of do,
But they
they're
sort
just
of
not
do, they're just
called
not
the same,
called the
but-
same.
And it's confusing until you, like what you were saying, if you had a table or
Got
like you
it.
were saying,
Yep.
just
Okay.
going underneath.
Yeah. Do that.
I like a table.
Table? Got it, table.
Can I just make a quick comment about the map? And this goes to the point of the varying traffic counts. And so I don't know what makes more sense, but I think it's useful to have the actual traffic counts. So you can see on the west side of Santa Fe, there's 26,300 cars a day. On the east side, there's 25,000. Now, whether you want to, in the narrative, if it makes more sense to round that to 25, just because you're talking about mineral in general, or if you're specifically talking about the west side, I would, stick with the 26.3. Same thing with Santa Fe. I only see the 52, but if, I don't know if that's just north, or if there's a number from the south, you could just round it to 50,000 if it's just at mineral.
Yeah, good
But yeah, I think there is a use for being more specific, because it's interesting to note that more cars are coming from the west on mineral than from the east. And also, the question is whether they do have east and west traffic for each spot where they're measuring, you know what I mean? So there's probably a 25,000, maybe this is eastbound, and there's also a westbound traffic per day as well. I'm not saying you have to add those all, I'm just,
Right.
for
I think
clarity's-
that's what's on here, is that what you're saying?
well, no, there's
I'll just
one number
clarify.
here, there's one number, what I'm assuming is 26.3 is the west side, 25,000 is on the east side, but the other question is whether that's east or westbound. I don't know that it matters. Yeah,
It could be combined
I
trips.
don't know that it matters. If it doesn't matter, just round it off and say 25.
Or what it is, that's,
But it is
Or what it
interesting
is.
to see that there's
What are these?
potentially more traffic on the west side of Santa Fe.
I think there is.
Yeah. But
That's the daily amount,
Yeah.
either way, either direction.
yeah, I mean, maybe.
Okay.
Be into recreation, open space, parks, and trails. Any comments?
So this is the area you were thinking of to expound a little bit more on the vision.
I think it's one of them.
The vision that I mentioned about the plat vision, the actual, South Platte vision. You would think this would be a better place for it to go into, under
I
chapter
think
5.
that Jason had an idea about that, and specifically the vision I thought we should put in with the actual discussion about the document in the first chapter.
Oh,
Okay.
right.
I'm sorry, I thought you meant here.
If it makes sense, yes.
I'm not tied to it, just where it makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, right. No, I hear you, but I wasn't sure if you were thinking in the goals or action steps. if that
No,
was-
discussion.
Okay, got it.
That's what I thought you meant.
Oh, yeah, so I'll look to see if it makes sense to put it there.
I would highlight, since you've already sort of highlighted it a little bit, I'd go ahead and bold your community engagement affirm the natural and recreation resources of the study of your mom. That's like the key point, that's the whole point of the whole thing. So just, since you've already sort of separated that sentence, I'd make that sentence almost a subtitle or some sort of standout.
action steps, whether it's here or in the character and design. I'm not sure which, you be the judge. But after number 6, as an architect, I deal with structures and not just, there's planning and there's also the building itself, okay? It says, require that development and structures along the edges of South Platte Park enhance and cater to the river experience and do not create barriers for public enjoyment of the river park. You could condense that how you want, but to me it's very, very important. Again, it harks back to what I was saying about a parking garage next to the Platte versus a restaurant with a plaza next to the park.
That'd be an action step.
Sorry?
You think it
Yes,
would be?
that'd be an action step. Whether it could be an action step in this section or it could be in the character and design section, but I felt it a little bit better being in the, because it refers directly, specifically to the park.
The park itself.
Regarding barriers, page 24, number 7, just might be worth mentioning Mineral Avenue as a barrier as well.
Well, there's other barriers. Yeah, they already talk about the barriers of the Santa Fe, the railroad, and actually they called out the Platte Park being a barrier, which I found a little offensive because to me what do they want? Development instead of the park? That was, I don't think the South Platte Park should ever be called a barrier.
It's curious that number 5, under action steps, protect is the only one that's actually an action step, but it's sort of random. It seems like it's actually part of natural areas. And I wonder about floodplains. We've talked about floodplains so much. Is that a open space consideration that we should be thinking about here? Obviously protecting floodplains.
Just add floodplains into
Yeah,
the open
just-
Is
space.
that one?
Yeah, that's a good point. That actually comes up in the South Platte vision where it talks about using the floodplain buffer zone, so that's a good point.
As recreation and open space.
I had some curiosity on the use of certain words and the meaning, like when we say protect, it's a very general word. I wonder, what does that mean? Enhance, what does that mean? You say protect, and I'm probably thinking protect. It might mean one thing to me. How do you protect the river? How do you enhance the river? I mean, you can say that to everyone in this room, and I bet you we all come back with a different description of what that might mean. I don't know if it's necessary here to expound upon it more, but it's very general, and it's going to lead people to have lots of different conceptions in their own head of what it means.
And it's if you guys want to change it, we can talk about it. The idea is it's general because it's
General.
it's a framework plan for future decisions, but we're not sure what the questions are, right? So it's about how do we create something that can be useful it'll be a specific question at some point in time, but at the moment, it's for any of those future
So leave it general
conversations.
to encompass as much as possible.
That's the idea, but
Okay.
make sure you know that it's what it specifically, so in that number 5 there is talking about the natural resources, so whatever context discussion about, right, this helps.
And if someone's looking at this, hopefully not 10 years from now, they might have a different idea of what that looks like at that point than we do now. If you get too
Right.
specific, you can counterintuitively eliminate things.
Right, so this would just be, hopefully with the PEL and whatever future decisions we're making about improvements to traffic on Santa Fe or not, we're going to make sure that we're not making things worse for or getting rid of natural resources and natural places for, our
Yeah.
local wildlife population.
Maybe in that example, it should be South Platte Park as the goal, and then comply with South Park Plan and South Suburban Parks and Recreation guidelines and master
Right.
plans.
See, I had that at first, but that's where I was thinking, we're trying to keep it a framework, right? So somehow if the idea is we're saying there's additional planning documents that are important and that must be, looked at when we're making these decisions. But I didn't want to tie it to this because that may be too specific, and we haven't all necessarily been part of those conversations. So
I
as long
think
as
even
we
just
make
saying
sure-
referring to those outside plans, anything regarding South Platte Park,
Right, exactly. Yeah, so if I can
Refer to
strengthen
those
that
and-
one, the beginning of that section in the chapter 1, and then maybe keep referring to it somehow. In these, I guess, in a general way.
Character and design, can we go to that? Comments?
Just on one of the action steps for design, I'll wait till you're there.
I'm there.
So on page 26, number 2, design. It just talks about all new development. I'm wondering, should we add also redevelopment? We could just say development and mean both, I don't know, but.
Sorry, Robin, where are you on this?
It is on page 26, action steps, number 2,
Okay.
where it just says all new development, and I just suggested redevelopment or development in general.
I had some, I don't know how, probably don't want to get into this because again, it's a framework plan, but goals would be, again, because I deal in specific buildings, varying heights of structures, quality fenestration, five-sided architecture, human scale, avoid monotonous forms, parking garages with exterior character. It's getting out of hand, but yeah, forget it. Or one sentence that combines all, quality architecture or something that raises the bar, as elegantly put in the comprehensive plan.
I like the idea of adding the quality architecture to it. How specific, maybe not, but drawing attention to architecture is important.
I just slapped down as many things I could think about, but then there's got to be some
Yeah, I think that's a little
three word.
too specific for a framework plan, which is why we did put in here about that, we have adopted design guidelines, objectives for this area of the city. So I want to make sure that that is called out in here so that
It is.
people do know they have to reference that.
The rural vernacular, which has been mentioned several times.
Adding something about that to the character number 4 on page 26, ensure future decision-making and urban design or building design.
Okay.
That might be more of a general statement that kind of touches on the architecture issue.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't, it's not something I'm
See if I can-
demanding, it's just,
You can figure out a little bit stronger on that.
It's just the architect in you coming out.
well, there's, everybody's got their,
Yeah, they do.
got their dog in this fight. We passed by the land use map and chapter 7 pretty much towards the end. Land use, anything for land use?
It's only everything.
Excuse me.
I had a question under number 7 on the action steps. It says best practices, and it talks about using the Certified Healthy program. I wanted to understand that better. There's no, you give this little brief, but there's no link or documentation. And when I went online and read, I found something called Certified Healthy, which is here in Denver. Is that what that was? Because it says that the Certified Healthy takes a holistic view of the factors impacting human health and assigns relative value to their importance. Gives property owners, tenants, and land use planners and regulators a practical way to guide decision-making and allocate resources. I'm not comfortable with that because I think our community should assign the value, not an outside company. Maybe use what they have, and look at it to consider it, but, I mean, this is a certification program, something you pay for and all that sort of stuff. It seems way too specific for our conceptual, and I'm not comfortable with telling our community that this organization is going to assign values to values of importance in how to allocate our resources in the sense of pertaining strictly to the health, the human health.
Well, just as a quick note on that program, and I appreciate the comment, I don't think it's that literal of an interpretation of how they're intending this to be used. I think the background, and there's several projects in the Denver metro area that have gone through and used this program to help with land use planning of neighborhoods. So that's the intent of the program. It's not the intent to say that, hey, community, you don't get to talk about this. It's only through this program. So I think that's how it's used with land use planning projects. But it's certainly, the idea behind it was the intention was to take some of the community input around these topics and put it into a framework that's already out there, but it doesn't have to be there at all. And we can delete it easily.
Or maybe just give us enough information we can understand it to say yea or nay. Because right now, I just found that website and I don't know what that means.
Got it.
Does this, is this a legal document that will be produced? Like it has to be followed?
Well, if it's adopted at the end of the day, if we adopt it, then it's an adopted plan. I'm not sure what you mean by a legal document.
A couple of years ago when we were doing the comp plan, we had and I don't think you were here yet, but you'll figure it out right away. We had a discussion about LEED certified buildings. And should we, in the citywide plan, put LEED or some sort, we boiled it down to high quality or sense of something, and kind of just shied away. And either we weren't bold enough to say we wanted to follow a certain standard,
Or we were smart enough.
or we gave ourselves enough flexibility to do it. So conceptually, point of this, all that to say is, if this is only intended to serve as a guide map, as a framework, as a guide map, as a suggestion, that's fine. If we are indeed going to adopt a program like this, is that something that?
Well, taking it back, this isn't it. It says it's recommended. It could be LEED for neighborhood. It could be any of that stuff. We could delete it easily. The idea is not that it's a requirement, but it could be a opportunity. Let's just say when the Enser property, at some point, right, they're probably going to come in to do something on that piece of property. And so are these some of the principles that we would want to encourage that type of an application? Or if Aspen Grove wants to redevelop and figure out some different ideas, I mean, are those some principles?
What if you just said it's recommended that future decision-making follow best practices, period?
Which could
I think we just have to list out what those would be, right?
We don't know, because they could change. I mean, what's best practices in 10 years is probably going to be different than what it is today. And this was an example of one of them.
I'm all for the program. We would like the highest quality architecture built with the greatest of care by people who are invested directly in our community that are going to protect our nature and buy a bunch of baby ducks. Kittens for everybody. 41,000 kittens, please.
Everyone gets a kid.
my house wants to interject.
Chicken in every pot.
Not if you have a kid.
Kitten in every sandbox, okay. I have one goal and then one little edit to an action step. Number 6 under goals on page 28 would be development at the station should anticipate and complement the development and redevelopment that will happen to the north and south of the station.
What page?
Page 28, I'm adding a number 6.
It's a map.
28?
9.
Looks like 28. 28 to
The
me.
land use, right? You're just saying under the goals for land use.
Yes.
29,
A new,
sorry, you're wrong.
additional number 6 on the goals.
Oh,
Well, you added
another
another
goal.
Huh?
You added a
I
sentence.
added a goal.
Oh,
That's why we couldn't find it.
Well, I added a 6. You can't count past 1. After number 5, there's a new number 6. Okay.
135.
Yes.
That's all you get.
You can only use odd numbers.
Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday. Okay. Under action steps, number 2, support Aspen Grove and Enzer as a commercial hub for Mineral Station. Don't ignore Enzer. It's the big elephant in the room.
Or you mean mixed use for the
Parking, yes.
Too, for that matter.
Yeah. Anything else?
Sorry, look on the last
Any
one.
mixed use development that would be on the parking areas for RTD would be in that same category.
Okay.
I think these were intending to do existing here, but it's just future.
Yeah, adding the future developments.
So I'll try to rewrite number 7 with future development and best practices, and maybe that'll get into there somehow.
It's easy across. If they read all the way down to there anyway, I think they probably have to use it.
Got something disparaging to say about best practices. They were too, what's the word, kumbaya or something?
Mom and apple pie, I think is what he said.
Best practices.
It's gone. We're done.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
It's crossed
No, it
out.
was-
Could be rewritten.
I was referring to the same thing Robin brought, the Certified Healthy Program, specific.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, there, I'm sorry, yeah, certified health.
Yeah,
healthy
yeah,
program.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Best practices in general are great.
What does that mean? Okay, any other comments?
Just one final comment, not on this per se, but there was a lot of documents that were presented in here that we didn't have links to, or we didn't have, like sometimes they're included on our, in our package. It would be nice to maybe just have a link going to it. I don't want it necessarily in the package, but just so that way if I wanted to learn more about what that certified healthy program was, I could just link to it and read it and learn what it meant. That's all.
Like the area plans.
Yeah, the area plans, specifically there was a Puma thing here that was, let's see, on page 5 it talked about the Mineral Lake Lift Station 2016 Community Engagement Overview. Like a link to that, because I'm
Oh,
not quite sure.
that's actually an attachment.
It's not in here for us. This is more for us to.
No, it is.
It wasn't on the, hang on.
Should have been.
They have the community engagement results.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
it.
is that what that means? Okay, maybe I just used the same title, so I don't get
Oh, I
confused.
didn't know that was different, so.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Well, that explained that.
If you opened it, you would have seen the same title.
True.
So, sorry about that. Okay.
Okay, want to give us an update on Lynn and then the other projects?
Well, yes, and let's quickly wrap this up too.
Oh, there's more?
Well, no, I just want to make sure that we're good. I'll make the changes. I'll make them here in the next couple of days, get them back out to you guys to look at. And then we're good to move forward and meet with council on the 23rd? Or do you want any other conversations about it?
So 23rd is the joint study session. That's our next chance to
On
talk
this-
about
on
this
this,
as a
yeah.
group. Okay.
With city council? Are you guys good with that? I'll make the changes. I'll send the document to you. Email, excuse me. But we wouldn't necessarily have another meeting with the planning commission. Joint discussion.
We're meeting on the 22nd.
I guess that's our, we'll get to that here in a minute. But if you wanted to meet on this again, or are you feeling pretty good?
I think we could do it via We could meet January 22nd. We do have that study session with council on the 23rd. We want to do 2 nights in a row, or do we want to do this via email and further comments? Is everybody eager to have 2 meetings in a row?
No.
I see head shaking and a couple of non-committals.
I didn't want to make any assumptions.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll skip the 22nd and
Okay.
go straight to council joint study session.
So
Okay.
22nd is off.
So yes, to Mark's point, a couple updates for you. First, Lynn Kruger did resign today due to some health issues, so just wanted to let you guys know that. Her term was up here in April, so we won't fill it between now and April. We'll just let that, the new terms and the interviews and all that stuff come up, I believe, in February for city council, so the new terms will be, that position will be appointed at that time. So that does mean alternate 1, Robin. If there's any hearing cases between now and April or whenever they're seated, the new members would be at the dais with you guys. So just FYI on that one. And then I wanted to give you, been working on how do I communicate with you guys on process, projects, how we're moving forward, so you can generally see that we're on task and timing and whatnot. So we, Denise and I are working on, we have a Microsoft project, and this is a draft, but it will get you at least what you need to start for tonight. Where we're trying a variety of ideas. This is the first one we have to share with you. So Mineral Station is the first one. But we're trying to put, here's kind of the milestones and the big items, if you will, that need to happen next for this project. So we're still working out the kinks. But this is Mineral Station and generally the next steps for you. So the study session with Sydney City Council. From there, we'll have a public open house. The thing that we're working on right now is this doesn't show all of the items, so there's actually an online portion after the open house, but then it moves forward, tentatively your calendar on a tentative night come before you formally, and then moving forward to City Council. So that's Mineral. The next one is an overview for you on Bellevue corridor planning and where that is in the process. So there is an upcoming community meeting is scheduled for February 5th. And this is a working document, you guys. This is not a finalized plan at all. We do have corresponding information on Littleton plans for the community, so that if you wanted to see just community, then we've added in some bigger chunk timeframes of context for all of these projects. But this is just for you guys to see. So really just look at it, give me your feedback. Generally, if you like the idea or format, we're still working on some of the details. And then the last one is the Downtown Design Guideline project. And some timelines around that as well.
Yeah, it looks good. I think that's very helpful. Just right off the top, maybe just Mineral Station, what is framework plan?
Yeah, and recognize this is for you guys, for yourself, so that I'll be sharing it with you so you can see where we're at in the project. It's not a public document. We have on Littleton plans, well, of course, I mean, it's information, but on Littleton plans is where we've spelled out the context for community members so that they can see the same thing, but this has more behind the scenes milestones that we're working towards.
How are you calculating the percent?
Well, see, that's what we're still working on that because we're not exactly sure how this over here is translating into that. So, we've had the program now for about a week. So
this is like my computer. It goes to 92 and then it sits there for a month.
So again, this is just, if you like this idea, we'll keep working on it to make it more user-friendly. So it's been Denise and then Sam Fox in the city manager's office has been instrumental helping us get this going, but just a way to keep task, and so that you guys can see all of your milestones as well, is the idea.
It's nice.
How often do you intend to update this and send it to the planning commissioners, I assume via email?
Yes, right. Well, we can work through that. The goal or idea would be as we reach each of the milestones, just so that you can keep task, or as I don't know, those are some of the things we're still working on, but I don't want you to not know what the general timeline is and what the, you know what I mean, when you should be expecting some of this stuff coming to you.
I could see that, send all three of them every time, even though maybe one is only, it's crept forward.
Oh, it's true. Yeah.
So we look at all three real quick. Oh, mineral station's moving, the other ones are, stalling a little bit or whatever. Okay.
I would actually suggest do this electronically, just save the paper for every time. Within our iLegislate or something would be fine. And then at bare minimum, and I get it, I've used Microsoft Project too. I don't know how half of it works. But this is nothing better than an Excel spreadsheet, and that's really helpful for just giving us a guidance map, and it's very specific to questions we've been asking for years. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
good, yeah. And again, we're still working on that, because that's not all the things. Somehow this is only showing what was called a milestone, so we still have some more details I want to add into there for you guys to see, but just if you liked it, then we'll
I have
work through
a
this a little more.
friend who specializes in this product, if you'd like to speak to somebody.
Oh, okay. I'll speak to you after this. Okay, so that's that for those three updates. The other thing I wanted to let you know, a couple things here. So on January 16th, council does have the second reading of the preliminary project plan, and we're calling it P4. It's the preliminary project plan process. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that's second reading for that. And the joint study session we just talked about in January with City Council, they are having a retreat in early February. And so tentatively, we also do have scheduled on your calendar for a breakfast with City Council on February 23rd. So anyway, more to come, but I just wanted to let you know that those are some other things out there. As far as hearing cases, you do have the next one, you do have one scheduled for February 12th. So we're going to cancel the January 22nd. So that means your first meeting in February, you do have an actual formal hearing that night.
What subject is that?
Is another special exception for Watson Lane.
Back to Watson, okay.
Watson Lane. I believe that old farmhouse has recently been demoed, or not, fairly recently. So there is some floodplain issues for that property, and so a special exception permit is coming to you then. And then also on February 26th, you do have a conditional use that evening, and it's for a tattoo parlor on Littleton Boulevard.
Is that where on Littleton Boulevard?
I cannot recall that specific address, but it's for a tattoo parlor.
It's
A new.
Oh, conditional use.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. So those are just some highlights for you guys of your upcoming meetings, and I'll send that tentative calendar out to you as well.
January 23rd, that's an evening.
The January 23rd joint study session is in the evening, yep, 6:30.
And on days where there's public hearing and study session, we've done that a few times in the past, but is that we do the public meeting first and then
Yes.
adjourn to study session?
So, anything else? Yes.
I have nothing else. Anybody else?
Great.
Thank you very much.
He's up in Denver.